Okay, welcome back to Consumer Trial Lawyer Academy. We're continuing our discussion with Elizabeth Larrick about her work in focus groups, mock trials, and in general helping you be a better lawyer, present a better case, get clarity about the issues that come up. And in this second session, we're talking about using virtual focus groups all along the case prep and during case development. We had a good lengthy conversation in the first session, and a lot of the things you may hear us say, we talked a good bit about that in the prior video. We're going to presume if you're watching this when you saw the first one, because we're so entertaining. But Elizabeth, thank you again for being with us and being with me on this and providing your insight. It's so valuable, and your time's so valuable. And so I'm very grateful for your help. And talk to us a little bit about using virtual focus groups and talking about using focus groups across the early phases of the case and during development.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Nick. Always enjoy talking about focus groups, but I really have found so much, like, the ability to use virtual focus groups, I think the opportunity to really shape people's practices, plaintiffs' practices, personal injury, consumer, employment, because of the ability that it's so flexible. And you can reach so many more people, and the time setup is it's so much easier. Plus, at this point, here we are, 2024, we've all had to use Zoom. Like, there's probably a lot of lawyers that are still using Zoom for depositions. You're using Zoom for hearings. So this is not like a new technology. We have to learn anything new. And the great thing is everybody else is up to speed too. I mean, I think before the pandemic, people were, of course, there's always been online focus groups out there, online surveys. But for me, there was always like, well, what about the group of people that just don't have that technology at home or have no idea how to use it? Well, don't even worry about that, because everybody now, most of the participants that we have and use really appreciate not having to get in the car and drive down to the hotel or the conference room and spend extra time, because the way that we, do our virtual is we're doing shorter. We're looking at 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hour bites at information. And that allows you to move a lot with speed. So, I mean, if you've got a pretty big city, right? So sometimes people call me like, oh, I've got this little tiny town. I'm like, okay, we can do tiny town places, but it just takes a longer to find those people, get them in there. But we have a large town, here, Nick and I live in Austin, gathering up a set of participants doesn't take as much time. So you can get it set and done in a week. I mean, it's amazing how fast you can move with speed versus doing in person. It's going to take more time. You're going to spend more time like getting yourself ready. And just being able to basically, turn on that Zoom in your office, get that feedback that you need on that one issue, maybe two issues, and then move on, right? I think one of the things that you said so eloquently in our last video was sometimes we do get stuck at the fork in the road in our case.
Yeah,
And
no
we
doubt.
just, we need that information to figure out, like, which way do I go? What's the strongest route? Because thinking through, like, if you're in discovery before taking depositions, if you know which way you want to go, you can really focus your prep on that and then focus the depo on that, versus having this really long 6-hour depo where you're just trying to cover every possible thing.
Yeah, yeah. Just great points. And really, I agree with you 100%. I mean, I find us even today still using Zoom, even when we're, the law offices are 10 miles apart in Austin, because, that can be 45 minutes at times in the right place, right? So, you don't want to spend the whole day in your car. I mean, and so virtual is still very prevalent. I think it is a big issue for lawyers now. It has become really a huge part of our lives and something that we pretty much, have to do. I had a defendant the other day say, well, we demand that we do our corporate rep in person. And I'm like, wow, that's a new one. Normally they're like, we want to do this remote.
That's right.
So I was okay. Well, all right. We'll go wherever your folks are at. That's interesting. But yeah, I think what you're talking about with focus groups in this instance is the same. I think it's hugely valuable and a great tool um, to be able to get quick answers when you have things that are very important to a case, especially a large case. The example we talked about in the first video, case that we recently engaged you on where we're trying to sort of sort out where should the focus be to try to point liability at one party versus another. These are great opportunities to use virtual, right? I mean, that type of thing is something that, you can spend an hour or two with a group of people and get a lot of good information from, the comfort of your 25-year-old office chair.
Yeah.
So it's a great concept. You know, in your mind, what are the differences between in-person and virtual for this type of thing? How do you see it from your experiences? Sort of a pluses and minuses, I guess, of sort of each type of scenario. Um, Tell me about that.
Yeah, so thinking we all know what in person is, right? You're in person, you're with them. And it's great because you are, like we talked about in the first video, typically you're waiting a little closer to trial and you're doing a lot of it's about the presentation style, right? Getting feedback on that, getting on your feet. Well, really, when you're looking at virtual though, one of the really cool things that you don't get in person is you get that face-to-face contact, right? You're delivering it and you can get close up of what everyone's reaction is versus you're not going to get that in person, right? You're not going to be able to see, if they're watching the video of what happened or they're watching the deposition, like you can get those really up close reactions that you couldn't get in person, right? Because the videographer can't, you can't zoom in on everybody's faces and that's one of the like kind of the larger differences as far as like in person versus virtual. And naturally, with virtual, we have to, and I think with both, you have to be engaging. You can't sit and deliver something for 30 minutes straight and expect people to pay attention virtually or in person, right? So you have to be a little bit more engaging and keep people engaged in what you're doing. And that's all thinking through presentation style, what you're presenting. But, obviously in person, you're going to take a day out of your office. You got to get a lot of help. You got to recruit. You got to pay a bunch of money to have people there. And when you do that, you're probably going to you're probably going to want to do a 6 hour. You're probably going to want to do 4 hours because you're taking a lot of time to prepare. So you
Right.
might as well use as what you got versus with virtual, it's much shorter. So it's a lot less prep time. There's no travel time, right? Getting from the benefit of turning on from our computers. I think also presentation style, being able to click a button and boom, there's your PowerPoint, right? There's no lag time. There's no, how do I figure out how to plug this into the which most places make it pretty easy with an HDMI cable, but I always say, hey, there, you don't just open that laptop, like click that button, it's going to be there for you. Um, and you're going to get a little bit different participants that are going to show up. I mean, that's just natural when you have in person versus when you have virtual. I think you're going to get what I've seen basically in the past 3 years, because 2020 we didn't do any. We've slowly brought back doing in person. Is I get a lot more responses for virtual than I do in person. And so, you know, you're going to have a little bit more variety to pick, which is great because then you can really sample size down. Okay, I want to get, we had a daycare case the other day. So it's like, I want to get a panel that has no kids. Like, great, let's get a panel of people who have kids, right? So just to kind of test to see, do I have to have a jury that has kids or not? And we were kind of shocked. The people without kids fought a lot harder for our for the kid than they did are people with kids. So it's there are definitely some differences, but I think as far as thinking about flexibility and the ability to do that targeted, okay, here I need to look at this. I need to test my timeline. I need to, okay, we made this, demonstrative. Let's see what they think about it. It's so easy to hop on, get it done in an hour, hop on and do 2 or 3 cases in 2 hours, right? So there's a lot of flexibility on getting that feedback very early and quickly versus if you do it in person, you're going to want it. It's a lot bigger investment. Sometimes for the same feedback, right? So that's kind of where I really push people to try it. It again, all the feedback that I've gotten is this is great. I love being able to, click from my office and join, watch a group of people just, dissect my case, and then I can go back and be like, okay, this gave me, 4 great points that I can work in to discovery, or I can work into my client's deposition. Um, and that's kind of where I have a lawyer who I work with who every kind of unusual case that she has, she does a focus group before she even files. Because at that point, you have limited facts, right? And that's okay because you want to know, okay, just with these facts, where do people go? Like, what's the assumption? What are they clueless about? And that really helps her kind of guide through where to go for discovery. Like, what are the big pieces that people want to know and other things that they don't care about. They don't want to know. And so it's like, okay,
Yeah,
great. I won't waste my time there. I'll go over here. And then even when you get into discovery, what I love people to do is do a huge discovery on documents, right? Get those policies, get those rules, and consumer cases are full of paper. So it's
right.
like, then bring those papers, right? Bring some of those big policies and say, would would you expect them to be following this? Yeah. How do you think they would be enforcing this? How do you think they're going to be supervising people? Or, and it's like, oh, okay, now you take that information and then you go hammer them in deposition.
Yeah, I think that's great uses of that resource. And I think those points are great points. And I haven't actually done the pre-filing focus group in the past myself, but uh, I see where there'd be a lot of wisdom in it, especially in certain types of cases, right? Especially if I know employment law cases are often about credibility, right? They're, what do people think about the plaintiff? At that case, as much as any, might be one where, you know, the perception of the plaintiff might be as outcome determinative as anything, right? Because a lot of times it simply is, he said, she said about what transpired, or she said, he said, depending on the scenario. And so you really would want to know, you know, what do people think about my client early on? And that would be good information. And then, like you said, the idea that there are places that jurors find important, or would be jurors, mock jurors, um, that you need to make sure you shore up and you prove up your preparation. And I do think that it makes a lot of sense in a lot of ways as I think about that mindset. We do all have, as lawyers, sort of we latch on to things and we think they're super important. And then, it depends on how far you want to go into your case before you figure out you're wrong.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's after the verdict, and sometimes you do it early enough to get yourself time to react and get to the right places. And that's you know I mean, it's the analogy of finding the right way to go. I mean, it I would guess that, probably even, knowing what you've charged for a formal pretrial focus group. I mean, the cost of a virtual focus group to get the right focus at the outset probably is a money saving venture, I would guess.
I mean, that's the way that's what I tell people, and that's what I have seen to be true is, for example, again, my good friend who comes to me because she knows, like, okay, and we talked about this the other day with her. She said, okay, this is why I do this. I want to know if it's an unusual fact pattern or if it's something that's a little bit of a one-off for people, or maybe it's something that, like, I am really worried about. That helps me know, like, oh, okay, here's where I focus, or here's my direction. And then she goes and does her work, and then she comes back and she tests after she's got everything. Okay, did it come out? Like, is the case seem strong? And then she does some trial prep ones. But um, I think that she, like, you really want to know at the outset, especially in any consumer employment, personal injury, do they care? Do they care about what happened here? And you don't want to wait until you get down the road and figure out, like, people just don't care about what happened. And it's like, oh, the example, and is she had a case where it was a 16-year-old kid, has an interaction with his basketball coach that, the whole team's there. It's very humiliating. And the school district, kind of gives the guy a slap on the wrist. And the school, I mean, of course, all the kids, they go on social media, they create all these accounts, they got this poor kid's face all over it. And a lot of the focus group just said, so what? Who cares? That's not the school's job. They can't do that. Like, what are they supposed to do? Like, and it's like, oh, okay. So then she's like, all right. So, she then has the ability to decide, okay, now do I keep going forward with this? Or do I know I need to go over on this route, and I need to really kind of not talk about that whole social media reaction kind of thing? Unless it comes in for damages, but it really, for her, helps them know, like, okay, which way to go, which way not to go. And we've even done focus groups for her where she decides it's just not a viable case, and they don't go forward, because kind of what you're saying, when you have a bunch of people who could be responsible, the general contractor, the subcontractor, the other subcontractor, you know,
The other brother
that's
subcontractor.
right. Like, and you want that general contractor, right? Hello. And they're just like, no. They're like, I don't, no way. Like, it's definitely this. And you're like, so they just decided, from a cost perspective, it was not going to make any sense, because they're going to have so many experts, and, like, so they just didn't file the case. Better to know then than to wait
Then a
right
hundred
down the
thousand dollars
road.
later. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I
No,
know, go ahead.
I was going to say, I mean, if you just think about the cost today, and you're not that far from working in plaintiff's personal injury. You've paid these bills not that long ago. I mean, I pay a 30B6 deposition, was videotaped the other day with video syncing, and you're $3,200 to do a 30B6 deposition. And I mean, I'm not boxing you on prices, but you're pretty reasonable in that range for just to figure out if you even got a case or not. And then, like you say, the other part of it is, hey, does this really piss people off? I mean, for me on a consumer case, the thing I've always hung my hat on the cases I've tried is that I realize that this does make people incredibly angry, and it touches on some of their core fears about things like the security of their housing, and having that stripped away from you by someone's arrogance or ignorance or just malevolence. That resonates, right? I mean, that's something I learned before I met you, and before I had the resources to pursue doing these things correctly and fully. But I was able to pick up that people reacted viscerally to the idea that someone lost their home because a bank wouldn't agree to a modification that the court had ordered, or that a bank had messed up a calculation and caused someone to go to foreclosure. People get really pissed about that, right? You're putting people on the street over a formula and a spreadsheet you can't get right. I mean, people can, react, but you need that. If you want to have a successful consumer case, you better have a big impact on the person or the family, and you better have something that folks get their hair on fire about, or else you're spending a lot of money and time against really good lawyers. And it's like, shit, did I, have I run off in the ditch, so yeah, that idea of spending, even if your costs were $5,000, I know it's not that much to do a virtual, but even if it were $5,000, it would be money well spent to figure out, like you said, just that question is so important of, you think something is people are going to think that this is a huge factor and a big deal, and then you find out, no, it's really not, and it sort of sucks the life out of the case, where you thought the value was, and where you thought the real injury was, and then you realize, hey, that's not really, it's not even upsetting to most people. Then
Mhm.
you saved the clients the trouble, the heartache, the headache of going through living that for a couple of years, and you saved yourself the money that you would have spent in a case that wasn't going anywhere, and you've been able to focus your time and reallocate to the right place. So it's a great. I actually think you haven't said that. I'm like, I'm going to start calling Elizabeth before I get very deep in some of these things. I mean,
Yeah. Well, and I
it made
think,
me start scratching my head thinking about my dog. And I'm like, hey, there's a couple I probably ought to run this on right now. But yeah, I think it's a great use of the resource.
yeah.
Um,
And the cool thing is too, is if you're not sure, so some people, you want to have more than one data point, right? You want to have more than one, like it's so much easier to have with virtual to run it again. And even if you did it a week later, right? Again, super easy and speedy to put together. But I mean, a lot of people do that just because one, you want a little bit more certainty. You want to, hear from a different group of people, but it's very easy to do that virtually, um, and rerun it. Okay, is this really, people really don't care about this, or you just kind of tool it and go at it again and think, okay, well, here's some things that we didn't give them. Because the nice thing about virtual, which some lawyers are like, I don't know if it's nice or not, but when you have limited time, you really have to make decisions about what you will focus group. You can't do it all. And that's half the battle as a lawyer in a case. You can't bring every fact to trial. You can't bring
no,
every fact to mediation. Like, you have to make those decisions, and having somebody help you do that, having those potential jurors help you do that, significantly saves your time and energy. And like, we're all limited. We only have 24 hours in a day. That's everybody. So this is a tool that people can use to really go after what's important versus trying to select and figure it out. And, going to other lawyers is a great resource, but they have the same mindset we do, right? So that's why
you're still
going to
infected though.
going to a focus group, and
We all have that infection. We're all thinking like they
that's
programmed
right.
us in school to think certain ways, and so
That's
we have
right.
to, we don't, I try to tell people. I used to tell people when I was solo that I was an interpreter. I interpreted lawyer to English, and it was my kind of one of my lawyer jokes. The other ones I can only divide by three. That's why I'm not in medical school or pharmacy school. But anyway, yeah, I mean, it's that idea that the block that we have as lawyers and what we get turned on by is infected by our legal training, and it doesn't always make the rubber meet the road with real people. And that's the part that we have to, sort of sort out what's going to be, and I think that's an incredibly good use of resources to get ahead of it, especially if it's a case that, like, the case you were discussing, where you're talking about a child in a school and they got special rules and there's limits to liability and you're going to have experts. And, man, you're talking about, minimum 50 grand to get that case to trial, maybe 100. And, you know, whatever it costs to figure out early that there's a gaping wound in your theory is much better than finding it out because you didn't do that. So yeah, it's a wonderful idea and concept, and it's, as I think about it, I feel like, dang, I want to beat my head on the desk for not having engaged in it more myself.
Well,
It's a
and
really,
and I'll kind of give you an example of, or two separate examples, but one set of lawyers that I work with pretty often is they like to do, they do a focus group every couple of months, and they'll set up a 3-hour block with me. And then what we do is we get together and we decide, okay, anything going to trial right away? If it is, let's allocate, a good chunk of time, maybe an hour and a half. And then, okay, what's left? Okay, let's fit in 3 cases here. Now, you've just split that cost, right? But depending on where each case is, right? Sometimes maybe you got one that's just came in the door, right? Okay, great. That we can we could do that in 30 minutes. Now you got one that's gone through discovery, and so we kind of have the ability to be flexible with our time and what we're going to do. And what they like to do as well is they do a series. So they just finished up a case. It's been probably 3 or 4 months, but it went to trial. But when they came in the door to me, I was like, ooh, this is a real big disputed liability. I mean, it's an underwrite case. But their client had TBI, so didn't remember, right? So we only had one version of events. Well, and when they got the case, solid group of lawyers, they did a ton of investigation. So when they came to me, they had a ton of information. I'm like, okay, well, here's their problem. And this all they wanted to make sure is, how do we flip disputed liability? So we started out, we ended up doing 4 focus groups over a period of almost 18 months. Right. So they kept bringing it back to me. Let's do it again. And they just kept moving that needle on disputed liability. 80%, and we got it down all the way to 50% before trial. And then at trial, they were able to get it down to 20%. And so like they used, an hour, 2 hours. Then they finally did a 3-hour one. Like and the last one they did, they had, of course, right up at trial, right? Defense produces that surveillance video of their client, picking up a box or moving something, so they're like, okay, we got to test the client. So, right. So we do all the opening stuff, and then we focus in on doing, them created a client video for like the client answering very open-ended questions for about 5-7 minutes, did credibility there. And then we compared that with this surveillance video, because they wanted to know, how do we get around this surveillance video? Is it as bad as we think it is, or is it not bad at all? So they basically built over and over again. And then when they came to trial, then what I built for them was a chart of like, okay, here's all the focus groups we did. Here are the styles, here are the outcomes, and here are some of we kind of do a grouping of, okay, here were the rat jurors for you. Like, here were the people who just, no matter what we said, no matter what we did, like, no, 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 no. So
Rat poison. Yeah.
that's right. So you had, it's not going to be an accurate 100%. This person shows up on your panel, they got to kick them out. But what you would like to have is just a little bit of like, oh, okay, let me keep that in my mind. Let me talk to that person. Maybe their experiences are different. But they had so much information for their case along the way versus waiting till that
Oh
last,
yeah. I mean, can you imagine being pre-trial 60 days out and find out that 80% liability against you? Holy gee. I mean, you're like, what the hell? I mean, that's when you start calling to the side going, there's still an offer on the table? I mean, versus, I mean, I'm sure that probably went from, well, I mean, look, we're not talking to a non-lawyer audience. I mean, everybody here, anybody that would watch the video would understand the significance of going from 80% against you to 20% against you. That's, and in a state with comparative negligence, that's the difference between a verdict and a recovery and not. And then, now you go down to the type of thing that you see sometimes. That 20% is a number you see sometimes when your client got rear-ended and they didn't do anything, just sit at a stoplight, get rear-ended. 20% fault, you were on the road. I mean, whatever. So that's a tremendous effort, and another example of a great way to use the resource over time. And that's some very artful lawyering to take that and learn those lessons and build that up over time. And then, like you said, then to have developed some pretty good profiles about, I use the term rat poison, but the types of people that are going to submarine you, you're just going to torpedo your case no matter what you say. And it's like you say, it's not really a guarantee that that's going to be every time. But what you and I know about this from our years of doing is you get archetypes, right? You get a picture of the kind of person who's likely to sink you. And I always go back to one of the first cases I tried and lost. I made the choice to leave a female physical therapist, on a case where there were 2 female drivers. My client got rear-ended, and she had whiplash injuries. And the other lady I had deposed, and she had never said anything about any types of sudden emergencies. And we got to the trial, and she said she had a sneezing attack. And that was why she had hit my lady and couldn't stop. Not that she was playing with her phone or whatever. Of course, this was 25 years ago. There really weren't too many people playing with cell phones then, but that was her excuse. I mean, and
Yeah.
so anyway, and that physical therapist who I made a clear distinction between leaving this female physical therapist on the panel versus a man with my client was a young, attractive, married military spouse. And I look back at it now, I'm like, you are so stupid. You're how do you leave a woman on a panel over a man when you have a female plaintiff? Because men, our poor biases, we tend to be sympathetic to women anyway, right? And so I should have just gone with that. But I went with, oh, she's a physical therapist. She's seen people have long-term pain. She knows, what it's like and how it can be chronic. And I had all these rationales that were so good. And then, the jury panel goes back and I talked to a juror afterwards, and it was like the initial vote was 11-1 in my favor. And that lady literally just slammed her hand on the table and said, I will never give this bitch $1. She is not hurt. She, the lady didn't do anything wrong. I'll stay here all day. And that went back and forth for 3 hours. And eventually everybody just gave up and said, we're never going to change her mind. And they, voted for the defendant because of her.
Mhm.
And archetypes, getting that information over a period of time gives you great idea of what your worst archetypes are for your particular case.
Mhm.
And if I had done that in my case, I might not have had life lessons.
Well, I mean, I think you don't want to start at ground zero. Like you really want to be able to walk in. And the other thing too, I will tell you, just thinking about jury selection is you hear it, you hear, and that just hearing people over again talk about it, what their reactions are, that really helps you when you're standing in front of somebody and they tell you something that's a little shocking. You're not shocked. You've already expected this. Now you know how to talk back with that person in a way that's helpful for your case versus you're just now getting up and hearing all these reactions. You're not sure where to go. So that's another thing I think is so helpful, even with you're doing these short 1 hour, you're gonna hear the way people talk about it, and you're not gonna have that shock or surprise. And also you're gonna be able to develop, okay, you said this, let me zoom over here, or how do I gracefully, either get other people to go along with that. So it really helps you tune your ear to how to do jury selection and what people are going to say, versus if
Right.
you start at ground zero, you may not know how then to transition, move that person, um, get them to talk more if you need that, whatever it may be. It helps at least it's not start from ground zero.
Right. I think that's a wonderful point. And the archetype sort of issue kicks in again in the sense that, at actual voir dire, if you recognize that bad archetype, that might be the time that you want that person. You want to draw in everyone you can who thinks like that, and get all those people sort of committed to that idea, especially if there's a bias there that can get you people gone for cause and save your strikes. Then like you said, there's just so much benefit to having that type of preparation so you're not flat-footed. um, and we have a lot of federal court practitioners in consumer law, and I've tried a lot of federal cases, and in voir dire federal court is so much more scripted and controlled. But the best judges do give you the opportunity to follow up. And so the way you address these issues in that scenario is you get your seed questions into the voir dire questions that the judge is going to ask in addition to their normal, right? Because they'll give you a few, right? Some judges will say, I'll give you 5, give you 10, or I'll give you whatever y'all agree on. And you want to get those seed questions that start the conversations and trigger those archetypes that you've learned through that process, right? And then that gives you those moments that you can stand up and follow up on those, and you're not completely separated from the opportunity to find those archetypes and identify them and get them to talk, even if it's only just to confirm to, even if you end up having to use a peremptory because you don't get to really pull them in fully, you still will at least have had the opportunity to identify them. And that's the benefit of this process, that knowledge over time and seeing the same triggers create, hit the same, same archetypes, as we're talking about, that's just invaluable, because when you see it multiple times over the life of a case, and you know that this archetype is always going to be negative, then you can always be thinking about and preparing for how to find those people for the one that they score, right?
Mhm.
Versus the practice rounds. I mean, the one that actually determines what happens. So I think that's another tremendous reason to make that investment and to use the resource, because, like you said, it is far, far different when you're standing up there flat footed and cold. And I've been, I was by myself for 25 years. So there are plenty of trials I walked into, especially as a young lawyer, where I had no damn clue what I was about to hear. And it was just like, it's completely flat footed. And you just hope you don't F it up and do the best you can. And sometimes it works out and sometimes not so much. But nothing can benefit you more than having had those conversations with multiple groups and running out those trails and figuring out where they take you, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why I love the flexibility of virtual focus groups, because I mean, there are so many ways to use you're not stuck with the traditional, okay, let me read a statement from this side. Let me read a statement from that side. Go. There's so much flexibility in presentation style and what you want to do to help solve the problem that you're having versus general feedback, which can be good. I'm not going to say that it's not bad. I mean, if that's all we get, that's still going to be helpful. But having flexibility on what you need right now. Maybe
Right.
you need to talk to that client. You need a focus group that's going to talk directly to your client and tell the risk. Or
Yeah,
maybe
absolutely.
or build the confidence, right? Maybe you've got a wonderful case and you've got a client who just is so terrified. You can use a focus group to build their confidence. You're already confident, right? So that's why, and when you do it in a short amount of time, you really have to hone in and focus, and that gets that focus feedback or that focus feedback. Really shaped, you know, feedback that you need to be able to make a decision and move forward, whichever way it may be, right? Settlement, file it, take that deposition, hire that expert. A lot of times we hear a gap in knowledge, and that's where it's like they don't know, like they're clueless. So that's the expert you need to go get. Or if you have an expert, they have to cover that topic because they're clueless. They don't know what this thing is, or what we're talking about.
Yeah, just so many good uses, not a lot of negatives. I mean, you do have to spend a little money, but it's not the cost benefit analysis, again, always weighs in favor of using the resource when you've got these kinds of questions, because they can be so impactful on everything from whether the case is viable or not, to what the value of the case is, to avoiding the traps that the defense would be looking to use to minimize your ultimate outcome as well. There's just really just nothing negative about using the resource, and there's a lot to be gained just by traps avoided, pitfalls missed, and issues identified so they can be covered. It's a great resource, and definitely something you should be integrating into your practice. And as I said, every time I talk to Elizabeth, it's always the same thing. I always think I don't use Elizabeth enough, and that's on me. And we get busy as lawyers, but you need to build it into your routine, honestly, because you need to be thinking about it. Really, I think it's good to think about it at each phase. I think you should be thinking about it before you file your case to figure out where your focus should be. I think that's a good way to use it. And I think you should be thinking about it along during your case as your case is developing, to figure out, how you're covering those things that are out there as concerns and issues. and it's a cheap way to get great information that can help guide you away from sort of the worst possibilities that would undermine you. Because if we're going on our gut and what we think, sometimes that's enough, but it's always you always miss the opportunity for the exception. But if you're getting your gut checked by facts from normal people, then you're getting, as Elizabeth said, you're getting great confirmation, or you're getting great information to help you adjust and change course and correct to get to the place you want to be for the client, which is the best possible outcome. And you're also getting information that might lead you to say, now's the time to jump off. Now's the place where we're in the best place we're going to be. And this is the time to get the case settled, before we get too deep and we can't. So that's another thing to think about. Elizabeth, as far as how you practice today with this issue, I mean, what's your split between virtual and in person right now? I mean, 50-50, 70-30, what's that?
Oh man, I think it's almost 80-20, 80% virtual. You know, people are still in a backlog. There's a lot of trials going, but I still like a lot of lawyers just say, it's just so much easier to do virtual. I don't even want to mess with doing in person. So I still have a lot of people that stick with the virtual, even if they're going to trial, they're still going to, just because from a cost perspective, it just makes more sense for them. But I have other folks that, they need that in person for trial prep, but they need it also for the client to really be able to assess the risk. And so, it really kind of, it's still coming down to an 80, probably 80-20 split.
As far as the split between, let's just call it sort of the last stage, the piece where people are on the eve of trial, contemplating trial, whatever, and the people who are using you earlier on to help steer the case and determine issues, what's your split in that right now? Do you see that early? I'm thinking you're going to tell me your earlier phase is starting to become a bigger percentage just based on our conversation.
Yeah, it's still probably 60-40 people waiting to do them after the last failed mediation, or I want to wait till after expert depositions, or I've got a trial coming up in the next 45 days, so it's still probably 50-50, and it's just a matter of, I think, people just knowing that it's out there, that you can do that, and thinking about it earlier on, like you mentioned, like you just like it doesn't really cross your mind, because when you're first getting a case, you're in total investigation mode. Like, what do we get? Where do we go? What open records requests? So sometimes it doesn't just even kind of come into your mind about kind of what's going on. So it's still 50-50, but I think it may grow, but I think it really just kind of depends on kind of where people are and kind of setting up their case flow, if you will.
Yeah, yeah. My guess is that probably over the next couple of years, you're going to probably see more people shifting to using you sooner, and even people like your friend, they're using it even before they file to get focus and get questions that they're thinking about. It's a smart use of resources. I'm going to start using you more on earlier in the cases. And like I said, this case we recently got you in, or getting you involved in with this focusing liability. That's a good example. I mean, the case is filed, but it's at the very early phase. But and even there's another case you've worked on with us involving an 18-wheeler crash. I really feel like we probably ought to do something in that case of on the issues of drivers and who's to blame in that crazy intersection there. But I'm going to start using you more. But I think it's going to start happening with others too, because it just makes so much sense when you think about it, to eliminate the gut instinct has served us well for a long time, but when you can get really solid factual information, it's you have to start thinking about why you're not, as especially when you know when you can use resources and you have resources to bring someone in with your talent to help with those types of things.
It's just a good tool to have in your tool belt. You know, I mean,
Yes,
we don't have a
yes.
lot of case prep tools that involve outside perspectives. We've got hundreds of books, we've got lots of CLEs, we've got checklists, you know, out the wazoo. But you know, that third party perspective is really kind of the golden standard to help kind of frame things up.
No doubt. I mean, you can know every trick of the trade. You can read every book. You can go to every seminar. You can be certified by every so-called master. But if you got a problem with your case, you got a problem with your case. And that's the part that we all have to realize is that, I'm not diminishing anyone's trial skills. You still have to be a good lawyer to go in courtroom and win a verdict. But it doesn't matter if you're the best of the best. If you've got a big stinker right in the middle of your case and you haven't perceived it, it's going to sink your battleship. So having that third party perspective, looking for those things that can put you at the bottom of the ocean, it just makes a lot of sense. And the faster you can identify those, the easier they are to avoid. So
I mean, the best trial lawyers do focus groups. I mean, I've got a trial lawyer who I work with who he's, he's been doing this for almost 50 years. He's got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of trial experience. He is good. He uses a focus group every time, because like, there's still going to be stuff that I miss. I still want to make sure, it's like, of course. So, sometimes our ego can get in the way. We're like, well, I've already done this. Oh, I know what they're going to say. Oh, it's like, okay, just test it out. Then then you got nothing to
yeah,
lose, but it's always,
yeah. It's just like buying it's like buying a stop loss on an option. You're just, I mean, all you're doing is confirming what you claim you already know in that situation. No, I'm beyond the days of thinking that I know it all. That's the one thing I've been bit on the butt enough. What I know is that I don't know, and I tell people the older I get, the dumber I get because I start questioning everything, and like you say, youth has the option to be a little bit reckless, but when you start getting as much gray hair as I got, you got to be a little more measured in those efforts. So, but yeah, it's a wonderful tool, and Elizabeth is a wonderful practitioner in this space, and she's the best that I know, and certainly she can bring something to your efforts to get your cases ready. And I'd recommend, if you can't reach out to Elizabeth for whatever reason, find somebody in your own town or close by that you are comfortable with. But you would be wise to think about the things we've discussed and how they impact your cases that are going to trial. And if you're not trying cases, then it don't matter, right? So you have to watch it all. But if you've got cases heading toward trial, then you really should be thinking about these things we've discussed, because it's amazing. We're all sort of OCD, obsessive compulsive about everything. So why leave to chance what the actual perception of your case is? Why leave that to chance? Get good information about what the actual perception is, and find out if what you think is as accurate as you think it is, because that's the only way to protect yourself and your investment in the case and your client and their best day in court, or their best outcome, which might not even be a day in court. So take advantage of resources like this. Elizabeth, thank you again. I think this is an incredible conversation. I think anybody that watches it can gain something from it. And it's always good to benefit from your experience and wisdom. And you got my wheels turning about how I'm going to get you more involved sooner in more of my cases. So again, thank you for your time, and we appreciate having you with us.
Glad to be here and help out. And like I said, even if you don't know whether you're going to go to trial or not, sometimes that focus group can tell you go or don't go
Yeah,
as
that's
well.
another
So
great bit of information to get. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, thanks so much for having me, Nick.
Thank you.